All right, welcome everyone. Appreciate everyone joining us for today's webcast, breaking down the biggest myths around external X-ray inspection. Joined here by FlexXray's Chief Product Officer, Kai Luker. We're going to take a slightly different tack on how we've done these webcasts in the past. Normally, we'll bring on a panel of experts from the food safety space, try to learn from what they're doing within their plants and their facilities to reduce and mitigate foreign material contamination. We're going to take a slightly different look at it today and look at external X-ray inspection as a service specifically. In conversations with folks in the food safety space, at events, in our daily interactions with our prospects and customers, there's a lot of misconceptions around what external X-ray inspection means and really how to integrate it into your food safety toolkit. And so today we're joined by Kai Luker, who is our internal expert responsible for setting up our process, looking at our quality standards, evaluating new technologies, and really, setting up the FlexXray process as far as our external X-ray inspection services to break down some of the common misconceptions we hear in the market around what an external service does, what some of the limitations may be, and some of the myths that we hear kind of bouncing around the food safety space around how to leverage an external service in your food safety program. So with that said, we're going to kind of kick things off here with our first myth or misconception, and that's that sending product to a third party is essentially the same as rerunning it on our own equipment. So Kai, just curious to get your take on kind of why this may not be the case.
There are so many ways that it's different. The people that we use from an inspection standpoint are trained and execute this every single day. Inside a food plant, just pulling from my previous life within the industry, one of the more difficult things to do was to execute a rework crew or a re-inspection crew with folks that it's not their skill set or day-to-day jobs. The speed is probably the next biggest thing. In fact, I probably should have mentioned it first. It is the thing that most people, when they step into one of our facilities, are blown away. We're not a manufacturing operation. Our CT scanning, which is fully automated, is still only 20 feet per minute. And then our visual inspections that we're doing, they're down to 2 to 4 feet per minute from an inspection standpoint. And then that speed, we're fully leveraging different technology that's inside of a food plant in order to be able to do either that visual or that CT inspection as well. So the people, the speed, the technology, those are the biggest things that make an inspection versus running it on your own equipment, substantially different.
Okay, so let's break down some of those individually. Let's start maybe with the technology side of things. How is what's found in a third-party facility different from what you're finding in a typical inline inspection setup?
Yeah, absolutely. We'll just take a quick analysis of what's in line in a food plant, either a metal detector and X-ray. And X-rays have come a long way over the course of the last decade. There's single energy, dual energy, photon counting, whatever it may be. And metal detection for certain things like aluminum is still one of the best ways in order to conduct an inspection of those types of foreign materials. But all of those instruments are purpose-built for that food product, that targeted foreign object, and there are limitations in the sizes and what you can get down to just based on the production speed in a food plant. From a technological perspective, the FlexXray equipment, we're using something that's closer akin to medical grade from an imaging standpoint. We'll take our visual inspection. We use a flat panel detector. That's the same detector that's used in a heart cath lab for an angiogram. From a grayscale perspective, it's over 65,000 levels of grayscale. It's 2 to the 16th power. We can manipulate KV and MA interchangeably in order to optimize the image quality for any foreign material and food product combination. Those things are fixed in a food plant. In fact, the algorithms are dialed in based upon what limited test spheres that you're doing, whether that's standard metals, or maybe you're introducing soda lime glass or ceramic in some facilities. But in FlexXray, we can find bone, stone, glass, a host of objects that we can't find in a traditional X-ray system, and then also the things that we can see in a traditional, we can find down to sizes, you know, below 1 millimeter in size consistently. I'd be remiss if I didn't talk about CT scanning. We're the only organization in North America that has CT scanning capabilities. That just helps to eliminate the two-dimensional effect that we see with layers of product as we're looking through that. We can peel back those individual layers to a 0.5 millimeter and look at the X, Y, or Z axis in order to be able to find and locate foreign materials. And it's allowed us to say yes to a significant number of projects over the last year as we've continued this development.
Okay, that makes sense. You mentioned speed, I think, in your introduction. Help us understand, I guess, the difference in running things at production speed versus running it in a reinspection scenario. What does that allow us to do from a capability perspective?
Yeah, primarily, an inline instrument needs to be purpose-built to fit the production line, not the other way around. So if I have a production line that's running 200 feet per minute, I need the inspection equipment that I'm going to install to be able to perform at 200 feet per minute. And it's not that inline instruments are poor performers or poor detectors overall of foreign material. It's just that at 200 feet per minute, we're not getting enough photons through that product in order to create the best overall image quality. And so we see limitations from a speed standpoint. That's first and foremost where our technology is different and our process overall shines, because we're taking an incident or an issue and tailoring our technology to the needs of that inspection process. Whereas a piece of inspection equipment in a food plant, it's tailored to fit into the line and the speed of the line.
Kind of branching off of that, what's the impact of, say, how a product is packaged on, how it's run within a plant versus, within a specific reinspection?
Yeah, absolutely. Most oftentimes in a food plant, we're inspecting product at, through the smallest aperture size that we can execute a consistent inspection with. So that's at the single carton, bag, or unit level most often. And then that product is presented to the case packer and packed for distribution. If you have to reinspect and use an inline instrument, you're obviously adding another degree of labor to that and having to take those things back out, introduce those to an inline instrument, and then repack them once again for distribution. At FlexXray, the technology that we're using allows us, most oftentimes, I would say about 80% of the time, we're able to still find the things that we're targeting at small sizes or the unique foreign objects and remain in the case with an inspection. And if we need to come out of the case because of a visibility issue, because it's a low density item from a piece of plastic or rubber gasket, or there are presentation issues such as with a small diameter wire, then we can obviously continue to go down, remove that product from the case, go down to the individual unit, and tailor our X-ray inspection to whatever we need to do.
Okay. The last piece of the puzzle here, I think you touched on, is the difference in running something with the operators you might have within your facility versus a more specialized setting where the operators are working on reinspection projects day in, day out. So kind of explain the difference there. How does that make an impact as far as the results you're getting out of a reinspection?
Yeah, I know when I say this, I'm preaching to the choir for a lot of our folks in the food industry that might be listening, but it can feel chaotic at best, running a reinspection or rework crew in a food plant whenever everybody's used to, running their process, their piece of equipment, their certain, portion of the production line on a day-to-day basis. And then we're taking those lines, shutting them down and repurposing the work crew for a reinspection or rework. Oftentimes, we also don't have the right resources in-house if we need to make modifications or adjustment to sensitivity levels. For sure, speed seems to be fixed, KV, MA, all of those things are absolutely fixed in a food plant. So we're not really changing the dynamics of the inspection, with our internal crew, whether that's the actual crew running the reinspection or rework, or if it's the resources that we have in a facility. From a FlexXray perspective, it's what we do every single day. dialing up. We're running multiple different product and form material combinations from a project perspective every single day at our facilities, oftentimes multiple changeovers to different types a day. Our operators are adept at making the right changeover from a KV and MA standpoint to magnification to contrast in order to be able to optimize that image. And then from a CT scanning perspective, we're able to not only build recipes that are tailored towards that form material and product combination, but we can run the appropriate amount of replicates in order to prove statistical validation before we ever even start a project as well.
So the last piece I think here we want to cover in this section is kind of the focus on how you, the methodology that you're using at a FlexXray facility versus kind of the mindset within a plant setting.
Yeah, it kind of goes back to the resource constraint a little bit. Whenever you're setting up a piece of equipment in a food plant, you're relying on your vendor to provide support for that, whether that's an X-ray or metal detector. You're setting up recipe parameters that are specific to the differences in the types of SKUs that you're running. You may have an object that's got inclusions or ingredients that are unique to one SKU and not to another, and those need to have different recipe parameters set up. It may create limitations where, if we're adding something that might have, seeds or nut pieces, things like that, now we're limiting some of the detection for the non-metallic objects that we might have been able to inspect. But the short version is we're having to rely on a vendor in order to come in and support those things every single time we need to make an adjustment or we're having issues. That's why when you talk to folks in the food industry, oftentimes, they're dealing with complications of false rejects whenever they're having changeovers or trying to present a new item to a production line. From a FlexXray perspective, our equipment is easily modifiable and it's easily adaptable. We've tried to make it as user-friendly as possible because we are inspecting a host of different products and form material combinations every day.
Awesome. Well, thanks for summarizing there. I just want to kind of put one housekeeping note out. Reminder, we want to keep this very interactive. We've got some topics we're planning to discuss today based on questions that were submitted from the audience members. If you've got something that you want to chime in and hear Kai answer, this is an Ask the Expert session. We've got some topics, but we want to hear from you as well. So make sure you submit them through the comments section, or if you're watching on LinkedIn, through the chat, and we'll gather those and try to answer them as they come in. So with that said, we'll move on to the next misconception that we want to discuss, and that's that external inspection costs too much compared to internal reinspection. So Kai, maybe that's something you can cover as far as how producers should be thinking about the cost of sending product out versus redoing the work or reinspecting the work in-house.
I don't want to set the table that every single opportunity should be sent to a third party and we shouldn't do anything from an in-house perspective. Based upon the type of product and the degree of difficulty and getting that out of your warehouse and back in from a hold release standpoint, maybe it's temperature sensitivity or there's just things about the product that you need to keep your hands around that at all times that make it difficult. But usually the way that we think about reinspection and rework from an in-house perspective, we try to view that as, oh, it's our labor, it's free, but we're really not always considering, we should be producing product. That's what we're in the business to do in the food industry. And anytime that we shut a line down, we're losing the opportunity to make product and we're repurposing labor in order to handle a reinspection. And it's just inefficient. Overall, it's just another opportunity for us to see what waste looks like in manufacturing at times. So that, I think, is part of the hidden cost that doesn't always get evaluated. Obviously, there are bigger concerns, especially if we're truly reworking and not just re-inspecting within a food plant, or worst case scenario, making a decision that we need to trash that product instead of allowing someone else to take a look at it with better technology, slowing that process down and providing some better results.
So following on to that a little bit, obviously we've seen many cases where an external reinspection, there's very clear ROI, in recovering that product. It's not always the case. So I'm curious how you would think about that from a producer's perspective, trying to understand how to make that ROI calculation.
Yeah, that's that's a difficult one just to paint with the broad brush here across many different product types. It's going to be a unique situation for every single food manufacturer to have to answer. I think that the challenge is just to ensure that we're understanding, what is the overall cost impact, because there's so many other hidden things. Let's say that we have a refrigerated item as an example, and the turnaround time in order to get that to the retailer on the store shelf, we're going to have to reproduce that product. So we're going to have to get inventory back in for packaging materials, for ingredients, reschedule labor and runtime. And even if we're not able to re-inspect that now, we're going to re-inspect that later, but we've got to get good product out that we know that we need to have on the store shelf. There's still a lot of things that need to be considered whenever we're making that example. And then one of the things that I think that sometimes we get caught in a trap with about whether we should just keep it in-house and re-inspect that ourselves with our own people on that piece of equipment that we inspected the first time. One, just we didn't really tackle this deeply enough earlier. I think that when we re-inspect something on the same piece of equipment that we've already inspected it again, we're creating a new data set, but it's not telling us anything deeper than what we were going to get out of it the first time. We're going to get a deeper data set whenever another third party is able to inspect that at slower speeds with tighter technology, at tighter standards. You're going to find out more about that, and you're able to make better hold release decisions. But lastly, from a third party perspective, I'm pretty handy around the house, Mike, and I can do a lot of projects. But there are certain things, electricity is probably my biggest fear as it relates to home improvement projects. I'm going to find the expert to be able to come in and do that. There are certain things that I just feel more comfortable with letting somebody else handle.
Fair enough. Yeah, I'm getting handier by the day, but still not handy enough to change out a pipe in my own house. So I understand it. All right. So the next piece here is we hear often that external reinspection is only for finished product, but we know there are other use cases we see within our facilities. Can you help us understand, how we use external reinspection for finished product, but other scenarios where it might make sense to use a third party?
Yeah, in the literal sense, we do need to inspect product that's packaged in some way, just from a sanitation and food safe handling within a FlexXray facility. But I think that the point that I want to make here is that oftentimes when we're having issues or incidents, and that's coming upstream from a supplier, whether that's a main ingredient or maybe a softer ingredient profile, and we're having to re-inspect finished goods, then we're creating a bigger opportunity. We're having to inspect more things than if we would have taken those steps to do supplier monitoring a little bit better up front, make sure that we have the right ingredient supply, the right quality in place. So, and FlexXray can support all of those things. There are certain sizes, in the tote size and pallet level quantities. We need to get down to 50-pound bags and those types of things to be able to successfully run that through some of our apertures. But we can support the inspection of virtually any incoming raw material.
Okay. So that was a short one. We're going to move on to myth number 4, and that is that a third party's quality and food safety practices are not up to our standards, meaning from a production perspective. So, I think this is a common fear as you're sending product out of your facility. You don't know where it's going to be. The traceability goes out the window. So if we could speak to that a little bit on terms of how a third party deals with your product.
Yeah, first off, from my previous life in the industry, there's definitely some comfort that comes with maintaining the chain of custody and the decision making and knowing exactly where that product is at. I understand, some nervousness around that at times, especially whenever you're a QA manager in a facility. As it relates to FlexXray standards, I want to start with some of our employees, the folks that work for us and our team. We have a host of folks that, not only came from the food industry in a broad range of roles and responsibilities, some were even customers previously. And it's the mindset that we have people that have been and seen and experienced what it's like to be in a food plant. That's really where a lot of our culture starts in the way that we handle product. Above and beyond that, our quality systems, our quality programs are all built like a food plant. I did that intentionally many years ago when I first came to FlexXray, because I wanted to be able to push ourselves into higher audit standards over a few years. We now participate in GFSI level audits for storage and distribution. We conduct those via the BRC, and every single one of our facilities maintains a AA rating around the country and has for the last 5 years. Not only that, but we also participate as an FDA registered establishment, and we maintain V status with the USDA for every single one of our facilities as well. So we maintain a good, robust set of quality systems, but we also participate in a wider range of audit schemes. And then we also invite every single one of our customers to be able to do the same. If you want to come in and audit us like we are a co-man or a supplier, we're happy to open our doors and provide that opportunity.
Okay. So, branching off of that, things like traceability, temperature control, could you speak to that in a little bit more detail?
Yeah, for sure. If you haven't experienced an inspection from a FlexXray perspective before, everything is handled at the pallet level. We maintain traceability of everything that we do at the pallet level. We're monitoring temperature from the first case that comes off of that pallet, as well as the last case that comes off of that pallet, to establish a delta in that temperature as we inspect each and every one. Not only that, but when trucks arrive, as trucks maintain themselves on our lot, and when trucks leave, we're checking twice a shift in order to make sure that all of the reefers are running properly, that the fuel levels are being maintained, and that we're handling everything from the trailer to the inspection line, back to the trailer again, and monitoring that. And then the report that you receive from a final inspection process standpoint shows you the traceability down to the pallet level of every single thing that was touched and anything that was removed from that pallet, whether that was a potential suspect, something that was damaged that we don't want to send to your downstream customer, or that was broken or needs to be trashed.
I mean, from a final disposition perspective, who's making the call there once the inspection is complete?
The customer at the end of the day is responsible for making all hold and release decisions. We don't want to be part of that process. We're here to provide excellent data so that that decision is easy for you to make. Oftentimes we'll see within the 400,000 pounds that was placed on hold, we're able to identify exactly where the 400 that may be affected by the event, and that QA managers then see that broad range and that data set that they know, where they can make good decisions about, trashing just this pocket where that incident occurred. Oftentimes, whenever an incident happens, we're going backwards and upstream in order to understand, but we don't know exactly when that event was triggered in a food plant. As a QA, speaking from previous experience as a QA manager, we're just trying to put the biggest bracket around that to ensure that we don't miss anything. And that's where FlexXray's data really comes in. We're able to whittle that down to oftentimes very small quantities.
Got it. That makes complete sense. Kind of going along the same lines as, we're providing the data, right? I think one of the misconceptions may be that, again, we're just looking at a contamination event. We're just trying to understand what happened there. But there are ways that we can use this type of data to fix upstream issues as well. So, I'm hoping we can talk a little bit about this as our fifth and final myth, which is that inspection services only help us solve for a specific contamination event, not upstream issues.
Yeah, oftentimes in a food plant, we're in firefighting mode way more than we'd like to recognize, and we do tend to treat using a company like FlexXray as a very incident-driven situational approach. But if that's the only way that we're leveraging a company like FlexXray that can provide a deeper analysis into foreign material, especially with the information that we can get, then we're missing out on a host of things. And I'll take it from the plant level first. So if we do a line extension, or we add a piece of equipment, or add a new detector, things like that, what better way to understand that our process is performing the way that it needs to than sending some of that product to have a deeper analysis done to ensure that everything is good. I know that this is not apples to apples, but it's kind of like we have an ATP swab from a sanitation event. We know that we're clean, but we still do environmental monitoring and do pathogen testing to make sure that we're really buttoned up. We can use a company like FlexXray that can see and find things at much smaller sizes to ensure our processes are performing the way that we want to. And we're happy to help in that. And then we talked a little bit about some upstream things, but from a supplier monitoring. I'll provide an example of a customer from a couple of years ago. They had a protein that they were using as the largest ingredient in their finished product that they were making. They were having some bone foreign material issues across a host of suppliers. And they sent a truckload of each one of those suppliers' products to FlexXray to help try to narrow down where the root cause of those bone issues were coming from. We were happy to not only provide that, but we were also happy to see them be able to use that data to help make better supplier quality agreements with the rest of their supply team, and establish some better parameters around, qualifying a new supplier, but also re-qualifying a supplier in the case that there are downstream complaints, and making that where it's an easier trigger. So we're not just reacting to an event whenever it happens out in the field or in a plant, but we have clear thresholds for, if this happens, then this product is going to go to FlexXray, or we're going to inspect a certain number of truckloads before we could re-qualify the supplier again.
Great. So we've talked about, using it to improve supplier quality. We've talked about, testing around equipment build outs or new line extensions, anything in the way of new product development, and understanding, what some of the pain points might be.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that we have a customer, I'll remain unnamed, that has a substantial R&D facility. They don't have enough room in the R&D facility for X-ray metal detector equipment. And not only do they send that product out of their test facility to us for just a base inspection to ensure that everything is good, but now that we have CT technology, we can also give them some information about their product and what it looks like under X-ray, what the density values, how varied that it is, so that then they can take that data whenever they do have, a full line extension, or decide to push that SKU out to a facility for mass production. They're already aware of some of the things that they need to think about whenever they're building the rest of the line.
Yeah, that definitely makes sense. I mean, are there other ways that the data can be used for things like root cause analysis, or just trying to solve the problem upstream again before it makes its way into a contamination event?
The supplier quality, supplier monitoring thing, I think, is the biggest opportunity for us to support that overall. Oftentimes when an event is triggered from a food facility, whether that's just the X-ray or metal detector, triggering and kicking off things, we pause production, we do an upstream investigation, try to find where those things are happening. That doesn't mean that we always find a true root cause. Sometimes it's fairly easy. There's something missing, there's something broken, but whenever we can't quite define exactly what that is, that should give us some pause to go look at what our ingredient supplier, what our upstream suppliers are doing, ensure that we're auditing them effectively. And if we're not getting secondary data from a source like FlexXray about their performance as well, we're missing a piece of data that just helps us make better overall decisions.
Makes sense. All right, well, that's the end of our prepared remarks today. Again, I want to encourage everyone to submit any questions you have in the comments box. Our goal here today is to tackle some of these pieces around external inspection, but Kai, is also an expert at all things X-ray inspection technology, many things around preventing foreign material in the upstream scenario. And so he's here to really answer any questions you have. I see we have a few that came in through the comments box already. We had a few that came in prior to the event that we're going to start with. But let's kick things off in our open Q&A now. Let's start with Stacy's question here in the chat. So how does the denseness of product affect the machine seeing potential foreign material inside a finished product?
Yeah, the two-dimensional world, the more dense the product is in and of itself, the more difficulty it's going to have from a detection standpoint. Oftentimes, the more dense the product is, certain inline instruments like dual energy provide a better opportunity because we can evaluate different energy levels as we evaluate foreign objects, and we can treat the product a little bit differently. Washing the product out, so to speak, with a little bit of higher energy in order to try to find foreign objects. It doesn't necessarily help us find better sizes when the product is dense and we're also having to run at production speeds. It creates almost like a duplication of difficulty. It does limit some of the sizes and standards that we're able to see. From a FlexXray perspective, because we can manipulate KV and MA interchangeably on any one of our devices in the two-dimensional setting, we can find the right setting between those two combinations to ensure that we can locate the foreign object in the product zone. And then finally, from a CT perspective, because we're moving the gantry around the product, we're going to shine that X-ray through, pass that photon through at many different angles whenever we reconstruct the image, that we're looking at that product many different ways in order to try to reduce that the complication of that interaction.
Okay, thanks, Stacy, for submitting. Great question. Another one that we got prior to the call is around turnaround time and logistics. So, especially in situations where you're looking at a short shelf life, turnaround time is a real concern. How do you deal with that from an external perspective to make sure that we're keeping to deadlines, whether it's a customer deadline or just a pure shelf life consideration?
Yeah, from a network perspective, FlexXray can execute. We wouldn't have any issues inspecting 50 truckloads in a single day around our network. Our network size overall allows us to turn around large projects around the country. From a single location perspective, if we needed to turn around a load of fresh beef or a load of cottage cheese, an example, these refrigerated items that have short turnaround times, we can get a product in, scheduled, turned back around, and I'd like to say less than 48 hours, but to be honest with you, if we have an existing understanding of what the foreign material is, we've tested this before, we can execute that in less than 24 hours.
Okay. So another question here in the chat, this is from Kurt. So in addition to supplier monitoring programs, what are some other proactive actions we can take to prevent issues before they become episodes? So for example, preventative maintenance program updates.
Yeah, from a FlexXray perspective, we'd like to be able to help at every layer of the organization understand where the opportunities are. I mentioned just a moment ago, if we can understand the foreign material in the product, we've seen or tested something like that before, we can speed up our turnaround time. Within the maintenance department, oftentimes we're seeing a host of O-rings, gaskets, plastic materials, things like that. And you're at the mercy of whether those things are detectable or not. And some of those items are detectable, on a spectrum, so to speak. They may not be detectable on your inline instrument until you get to a size of like 7 or 8 millimeters. But FlexXray would be able to detect those things down to 2 or 3 millimeters. Some are not detectable at all in either scenario. But where we would come in to play here is we'd be willing and want to work with every single department to understand these are the 10 O-rings that we use. Which ones are detectable? Which ones are not? At what level are they detectable? So that if we do have an event, we can make a good decision and get product turned around and hit the 24-hour mark that I was just speaking of a few moments ago.
Awesome. Well, another question in here from the audience. This is from Eric. So any basic considerations that help us screen what may or not be something that you can assist with? So what information do you need initially to help make a decision wonder if you're capable of inspecting our product. So kind of around FlexXray's process, the sample testing process, how to make sure that goes efficiently.
Yeah, absolutely. The only limitation is around the size and weight of the product. And if we need to get that product packed down to a smaller size, we want to answer those questions, immediately. We have a significant aperture size on all of our two-dimensional X-rays. We can handle product that's up to 32 inches wide and 24 inches tall if necessary. We do have some weight limitations as it relates to how to get product onto the machine safely from a human being perspective. As we start to exceed 60 pounds, those do provide some other things we need to work around. But those are just really the two initial considerations about potential limitations. After that, it's really about understanding and breaking down a master case into its subunits and targeting the size of the foreign material that you're trying to find down to the smallest level. So maybe we can find 4 millimeters of a very difficult rubber gasket in an entire case, but if we were to take that down to the individual bag or carton level, we could find down to 1.5 or 2 millimeters in size. Those are the types of things that we're doing within sample testing on a daily basis to provide good information back to you, not only for the incident of the day, but the incident of the future as well, so that you understand exactly how we're going to inspect, handle, and work with your product.
All right. Thanks, Eric, for the question. Again, keep them coming. It doesn't have to be specific to external inspection. It just could be questions around X-ray, technology in general. Kai's here to answer whatever you guys may have. And a follow-up here from Eric is, can you post the aperture max size and max weight capacity?
I don't have a graphic information to post right in front of me, but any of our sales team are happy to provide some more insight.
All right. So another question that we got in advance here is around the question of rentals. I think, naturally when an incident occurs, the gut reaction is, let's solve this in-house, bring in an X-ray rental, whether it's you don't have X-ray in-house or, maybe your machine is down or you just need more capacity. So, explain to us, I guess, your take on, renting an X-ray machine versus sending it out, what some of the pros and cons might be.
Yeah, first and foremost, I'll talk about FlexXray's technology. The size of the equipment, the devices that we're using, because they're more akin to medical instrumentation than an inline instrument, they're not conducive to just being put on a truck and shipped around the country. They're very sensitive, they're very large, very heavy. The second piece of that is around turnaround time and the right skill set, the right people. We view what we do in-house on a daily basis as a service that we've educated and tailored ourselves towards being able to execute for a customer at any time. We do understand, though, that there are certain product types, certain situations, whether that's chain of custody or shelf life or shipping costs, that may limit the opportunity. We are in the process of evaluating some future equipment that we can mobilize and move around the country, but we could still execute the slower speed, the proper inspection of, find things that are smaller than the things than a typical inline instrument can have, but also be able to deploy those to your facility. We're just not ready to roll that process out quite yet.
All right. Well, I think that's the end of our questions from the audience. Again, if anybody has anything extra here, you want to reach out to Kai, you can do so through our website. He'll be happy to answer any questions. Again, we'll look to do a few more of these roundtables here before the end of the year, hopefully with, some folks from industry, but also really excited in September to roll out our 2025 foreign material benchmark report. This is the second year we've now gathered data here to share kind of what people are seeing in the industry as far as frequency of foreign material, what some of their biggest sources are, how they're dealing with the challenge. So really excited to share that data out with the food safety community here in September. And of course, we'll have a couple of webinars to talk about the data and the findings there as well. So that being said, I want to thank Kai for his expertise today. He could talk for hours here. We tried to limit it down to the most pressing questions. And also to everybody for joining. Again, your questions and your conversation are what make this valuable. And we want you to see it as an opportunity to come and bring questions and gain insight. You're taking your time out of your day to join us for these calls. So again, appreciate everyone's time. Thank you for joining, and keep an eye out for future events as we get into the fall. All right. Thanks again, everyone.